I was browsing Craigslist late one night looking for a cheap bike. I wanted something to get me to and from work without breaking the bank, and Craigslist always had good deals. After scrolling for about half an hour, I found the perfect one. A used mountain bike in great condition. Only 50 bucks. The post said the seller needed to get rid of it fast and was open to negotiating. It seemed like a steal. The seller's name was Tom, and he responded to my email almost immediately. He was direct and straight to the point. No small talk, just instructions. Come tonight, bring cash. Here's the address. I'll be waiting. The address wasn't far from me, maybe a 10-minute drive. I thought about waiting until the next day, but $50 for a solid bike? I didn't want to miss out. So I grabbed the cash, threw on a hoodie, and headed out. When I pulled up, something fell off. The house was completely dark. Not even a porch light was on. I double-checked the address. This was the place. I figured maybe he just wasn't big on lighting. People can be weird like that. I parked and texted him. Here for the bike. No response. I waited for a few minutes, then got out of my car. The street was eerily quiet, and I could hear my footsteps echo as I walked up to the front door. I knocked, and almost immediately the door creaked open. No one was there. Tom? I called out. Nothing. I should have left. Every instinct in my body told me to leave, but I stupidly stepped inside of his house. The air was cold, and the house smelled like a damp wood and something metallic, like blood. There were no lights, just the faintest glow coming from a room down the hall. Tom? I tried again, louder this time. Footsteps, heavy ones. They were slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere upstairs. I felt my pulse quicken, and I wanted to turn around and run, but something kept me rooted in place. The footsteps stopped, and a deep, gravelly voice echoed down. Come upstairs. The bike's in the garage. I couldn't explain why, but the voice didn't sound right. It was too calm, too cold. Every part of me wanted to bolt, but my feet moved toward the staircase. I forced myself to stop at the bottom step. Why don't you just bring it down here? I called up, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long pause, the kind that feels like an eternity. Then the voice said, I can't. Come upstairs. My heart was racing. I turned to leave, but the front door was now closed, even though I hadn't heard it shut. Panic gripped me. I grabbed the handle and yanked, but it wouldn't budge. That's when I heard something else. From behind the door at the end of the hall came a soft, scrapping sound. It was like something was being dragged across the floor. I stepped away from the door, back toward the hallway. I told myself I just needed to see what was behind that door, and then I could figure out a way to get out of here. Slowly, I moved toward it, my breath shallow. As I reached for the handle, it swung open by itself, revealing a dimly lit garage, and there, lying on the floor in a pool of dark liquid, was a bike, just like the one I saw in the Craigslist ad. Only this time, the bike was covered in blood. Next to it was a pair of legs, lifeless and motionless, wearing the same clothes I had on. I backed away, horrified, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps, coming down the stairs, faster this time, charging toward me. I turned and ran, yanking on the door with all my strength until it finally gave way. I sprinted to my car, not daring to look back, and drove off as fast as I could. The next day, I checked Craigslist. The ad was gone, but now there was a new post. Same bike, same price, but a different address. Someone else was going to fall into the trap. It started with a simple Craigslist ad. Room for rent, quiet neighborhood, cheap, no background checks, available immediately. I was desperate, so it sounded perfect. I'd been couch surfing for weeks after breaking up with my girlfriend. My friends were starting to get annoyed with me hanging around, so I needed something fast. I called the number in the ad, and a woman answered. Her voice was soft but firm. "Come by tomorrow at 8 p.m., she said, without much small talk. "I'll leave the door unlocked." When I asked her for an address, she quickly rattled off an unfamiliar street in a part of town I didn't know too well. Something about her voice, the speed of the conversation, it was odd, but I ignored the uneasy feeling. I had no other options. The next night, I drove to the address. The neighborhood was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that felt wrong. As I pulled up to the house, my stomach twisted. The place was run down. Peeling paint, overgrown weeds, broken blinds, hanging in the windows. But the lights were on, so I figured it couldn't be that bad. I stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door, which, as promised, was unlocked. Inside, the house was cold, colder than it should have been for early September. No furniture in the living room, no pictures on the walls. It was as if no one actually lived here. "Hello?" I called out. There was no answer. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. I should have left right then and there, but something made me stay. I wandered further into the house, my footsteps echoing against the bare floor. And at the end of the hallway, a door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, revealing what looked like a bedroom. There was an old, sagging bed in the center, the only piece of furniture in the room. And then I saw her, the woman who had answered the phone. She was standing by the window, staring out into the dark backyard, her back towards me. I cleared my throat, but she didn't turn around. Hi, I'm here about the room?" I said, my voice shaky. She didn't move. For a long moment, she just stood there, her head tilted slightly to one side, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then, slowly, she turned. Her face, God, her face was wrong. Her eyes were wide, too wide, and her mouth hung open into a grotesque, unnatural smile. But what sent a chill down my spine was the way her skin seemed too tight for her bones, like it had been stretched over her skull and pulled taut. "You're here," she whispered, her voice no longer soft but raspy and distorted, as if it came from somewhere deep inside her. "I've been waiting for you." I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was terribly wrong. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to get out, but I couldn't move. I think there's been a mistake. I'm gonna go." She took a step toward me, her movements jerky and unnatural. No mistake. You're perfect." Her voice crawled under my skin, making every hair on my body stand on end. Without thinking, I bolted. I ran down the hallway, through the living room, and out the front door, slamming it behind me. I jumped into my car and sped away, not daring to look back at the house. When I got home, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Maybe it was a trick, some kind of sick prank. But as I sat there, my phone buzzed. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Why did you leave? You belong here." My heart dropped in my stomach. I blocked the number immediately, but the messages kept coming, each one more twisted, more disturbing than the last. "You can't hide. Come back. We have a place for you. I'm waiting." I changed my number the next day, but that night, I heard something tapping on my window. I live on the 3rd floor. When I finally mustered the courage to pull the curtain aside, I saw her, standing in the street, staring up at me with that same grotesque smile. I've been getting emails now too, from an unknown sender. Just the same message over and over again. "The room is still available. Come home." And I'm starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, I never left. I was between jobs and running out of money fast when I stumbled upon a Craigslist ad that seemed too good to be true. One-night gig, easy money, $1,500 for simple chores. No experience needed. Contact me for details. It was vague, but I figured I had nothing to lose. I replied and got a response within the hour. The instructions were simple. Show up to a specific address by 11 p.m., bring a flashlight, and be prepared to work throughout the night. The job required discretion and focus. No other details were displayed. I should have known better, but $1,500 was more money than I'd seen in weeks. Desperation does strange things to your judgment. The address they gave me led to a massive, old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place you'd expect to see on a ghost tour. Tall, narrow windows, peeling paint, and an overgrown lawn that hadn't been touched in years. I hesitated when I pulled up, but I convinced myself it was just another creepy homeowner. I texted the number they gave me, and within seconds, the front door creaked open. I couldn't see anyone, just the dim light spilling from the hallway. My phone buzzed again. "Come inside. Second door on the left." I stepped inside and immediately noticed the heavy silence. No sound of a clock ticking, no hum of electronics, just dead air. The house smelled musty, like it had been closed up for years. I made my way to the second door, my footsteps muffled on the thick, dust-coated carpet. The door opened into a dimly lit room where a man sat at an old wooden desk. His back was to me, but I could see the sharp, angular lines of his shoulders in the low light. "You're here for the job?" he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "What exactly am I supposed to be doing?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood slowly and turned to face me. His eyes were sunken and cold, his skin pale and stretched tight over his cheekbones. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I need you to watch the house tonight," he said. "There are 3 rules you must follow." I waited, suddenly aware of the rapid thumping in my heart. "First, no matter what you hear, do not leave this room until 6 a.m. Second, do not answer the phone, even if it rings. And third," he paused, his eyes locking onto mine, "if you see them, do not speak." I tried to ask who they were, but he ignored my question. He walked past me toward the door and disappeared into the hallway without another word, leaving me alone in the room. I stood there for a minute, my mind racing. I should have left right then, but curiosity, Or maybe greed got the better of me. I told myself it was just some weird, creepy old man. Maybe he was a collector of odd things, or maybe it was just a strange test. I could handle it for one night. I settled into a chair in the corner of the room and pulled out my phone to pass the time. For the first hour, everything was fine. The house creaked occasionally, but that's normal for an old house. Then, around midnight, I started hearing footsteps upstairs, slow and heavy. I froze, listening as they made their way from one end of the house to the other. I reminded myself of the rule: don't leave the room. Maybe it was the homeowner. Maybe someone else was staying here. But then the footsteps stopped, right outside the door. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the door handle, half expecting it to turn, but nothing happened. Silence. I glanced at my phone. 12:17 a.m. There were still hours left. Then the phone on the desk rang. It was an old, rotary phone, the kind you'd expect to find in a museum, and the loud, shrill ring cut through the silence like a knife. The man's words echoed in my mind. Do not answer the phone. I stared at it as it rang again, and again, and again. My pulse quickened as I fought the urge to pick it up. After what felt like an eternity, the ringing stopped. I exhaled, feeling my body relax for a moment. But then, I heard something else, a soft shuffling, like feet dragging across the carpet. My heart pounded as I realized the sound wasn't coming from the hallway, but from inside the room. Slowly, I turned my head toward the corner, and that's when I saw them. Two figures, hunched and pale, crouched in the shadows. Their eyes gleamed, reflecting the dim light of the lamp. They were gaunt, their limbs too long, too thin, their faces devoid of expression. They stared at me, unblinking. I clenched my hands, gripping the arms of the chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. I remembered the rule: if you see them, do not speak. The figures moved slowly, creeping closer, their bones cracking softly as they shifted. I wanted to scream, to bolt for the door, but I couldn't. My entire body was paralyzed with fear. They stopped just a few feet away, their faces inches from mine, their breath cold against my skin. One of them opened its mouth, revealing sharp, jagged teeth, but it didn't speak. Instead, it just stared, as though waiting for me to break the silence. I shut my eyes tight, praying for them to go away. The minutes dragged on, every second feeling like an eternity. The room grew colder, the air heavier, but I stayed silent. Eventually, the shuffling returned. I opened my eyes just a crack to see the figures retreating back into the corner, disappearing into the shadows. For the rest of the night, I sat frozen in that chair, unable to move, unable to look away from the dark corner where they had gone. The phone rang twice more, but I didn't dare answer it. Finally, at exactly 6 a.m., the man returned. He stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the room. "You followed the rules," he said, a hint of approval in his voice. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't want to know what they were, or why the rules mattered. I just wanted to get out of that house. He handed me an envelope with $1,500 in cash, and I left without a word. But every now and then, late at night, I hear that phone ringing again in my head, and I wonder if they're still waiting for me in some dark corner where the light doesn't reach.